What happened when a farmer discovered a wounded Bigfoot and chose to hide it for 30 years, shielding it from the outside world? From secret trails to silent nights, every year brought new challenges, unexpected intelligence, and haunting questions about what the creature truly knew. Stay with us, because the moment the feds finally found out will shock you beyond belief. The creature that shouldn't exist. A warm twilight haze settled over Henry's farm as the last insects of the evening droned against the fencing, creating a low hum that usually signaled the end of his day. He had finished feeding the animals and reached for the lantern, when a sharp, unnatural crack echoed from the far edge of the property. The sound cut through the quiet in a way no deer, coyote, or fallen limb ever had. Henry froze in place, lantern halfway raised, aware that something living was struggling in the dark just beyond his garden rows. A thick ripple of movement pressed through the tall pines before he even took a step. Leaves shivered in rapid bursts, followed by heavy, uneven footfalls that reminded him of a large animal trying to outrun its own failing strength. His instincts told him to retreat to the safety of the house, but curiosity pulled harder. Henry approached the fence with slow, measured breaths, every nerve preparing for a creature he had probably seen 100 times in those woods. What appeared instead made him drop the lantern entirely. A massive figure collapsed near the cedar stump, its limbs folded in ways that suggested both power and deep exhaustion. The creature's breathing was shallow, almost desperate, and threads of dark fur clung to its sweat-soaked frame. Henry's first thought was that someone in a costume had been attacked, but the raw, instinctive presence radiating from the being made that idea vanish immediately. The eyes opened for a moment, revealing a depth and awareness that struck Henry harder than the size of the creature itself. A single attempt to rise sent it crashing back to the earth, releasing a guttural sound that blended pain and fear into one haunting tone. Henry saw the wound then, a deep laceration along the ribcage that looked like it had been torn by metal, not claws. The injury was fresh, still oozing in steady pulses, and it made the creature's posture tilt dangerously toward unconsciousness. Henry understood that if he walked away, the being would die alone beneath the pines before sunrise. A surprising calm washed over him as he stepped closer, as though a part of him long buried had already decided what must be done. He grabbed an old tarp from the shed, wrapped as much of the creature as he could, and strained with every ounce of strength to maneuver it toward the barn. Each drag left shallow grooves in the soil, grooves he knew he would have to erase by morning. The effort pushed his lungs to their limit, but something about the creature's faint attempts to lift its own weight made him continue. A flicker of comprehension crossed the creature's face when Henry whispered soothing words, the sort used for frightened horses and injured dogs. That moment of connection shook Henry far more than the physical labor. The creature seemed to understand the tone, if not the language, and its muscles relaxed enough for him to continue pulling it across the field. By the time he reached the shadowed barn door, his arms trembled and sweat soaked his shirt. Inside the barn, the familiar scent of hay and timber created a strange contrast to the extraordinary being sprawled across the floorboards. Henry hurried to gather blankets, water, and the medical supplies he kept for livestock emergencies. He worked with quiet precision, noticing details he knew he would never forget. The creature had hands shaped almost like a man's, though thicker and covered in coarse hair. Its breathing eased slightly when Henry pressed a clean cloth against the wound, as if it understood he was attempting to help. A rapid storm of questions swirled in his mind. What kind of creature was capable of such expression? What had injured it? Why had it come toward his farm and not deeper into the forest where it could hide? Each question planted a seed of unease that took root as he watched it drift into unconsciousness. A decision formed in the dim lantern glow, one that would alter every remaining year of Henry's life. He would not alert the authorities. He would not call hunters or medical teams. He would keep this being hidden, protected, and alive for as long as he could manage. Whatever it was, it did not deserve to die at the hands of people who might fear it or exploit it. What unseen force drove this wounded giant toward Henry's land on that very night? And what would it reveal once it finally woke? Stay with us as the mystery deepens. The stranger in the shadow barn. The moment Henry led the creature into the barn, he realized he was stepping into an entirely new reality. Dust motes drifted lazily in shafts of sunlight, falling on piles of forgotten tools and rusting shelves. Every sound, the creak of a floorboard, the flutter of a loose tin, echoed unusually loud in the empty space. He moved cautiously, aware that the creature was observing him, not just with eyes, but with a presence that seemed to weigh his intentions. Its breathing was uneven, each exhale carrying an intelligence that unsettled him. He had expected fear or aggression, but instead there was something almost deliberate, like it was cataloging the room. While tending to its injuries, Henry noticed behaviors that defied every story he had ever heard. When he offered food, it sometimes refused, turning away with a subtle shake of its head. Yet, in the moments he thought it indifferent, it rearranged objects with meticulous care. Tools were aligned by size, scraps of wood stacked in orderly patterns, and even the straw in the corners of the barn was brushed into neat piles. Each action felt intentional, as though the creature was silently asserting that the barn was now a shared space, governed by rules Henry did not yet understand. At night, the barn transformed into a theater of quiet negotiation. Henry would sit on a rickety stool while the creature moved among the shadows, pausing to examine objects, then watching him closely. Its gaze was unnervingly focused, following every subtle motion. Occasionally it would reach out and touch something familiar, a hammer, a jar, a worn blanket, and linger as if recalling memories that were impossible for it to have. The intensity of its attention made Henry question whether his own perception of intelligence was flawed, or if the creature was simply beyond comprehension. The most disconcerting moments came when the creature responded to sounds and objects Henry had not intended to draw attention to. A bird landing on the barn's roof would provoke a soft tilt of its head, a faint murmur, and an almost imperceptible shift in posture. Henry realized the creature was absorbing far more than he imagined, mapping not just the physical space, but the rhythm of life around it. Each small observation seemed purposeful, a communication that Henry could only partially decode. Over time, Henry began to understand subtle signs of the creature's trust. It would approach him slowly, sniffing his hand or brushing lightly against his leg before retreating to its corner. When he spoke, it listened, tilting its head and blinking deliberately, as if weighing his words. There was no fear, only a cautious acknowledgement that boundaries were being respected. It was a relationship built not on dominance, but on quiet recognition of each other's capabilities and intentions. The barn itself took on a new identity. What had once been a neglected storage space became a living laboratory, an arena for observation, and a sanctuary for secrets. Henry moved with deliberate care, aware that every action could provoke a reaction. He began recording behaviors in a small notebook, the way it arranged stones in geometric patterns, the precise method of cleaning its space, the moments when it ignored or engaged him. Each entry hinted at layers of understanding and awareness that seemed to exist far beyond ordinary life. One evening, Henry paused to watch the creature examine a familiar object with an intensity that made his stomach tighten. The wooden mallet from his grandfather's shed, the very one he had thought lost decades ago, lay at its feet. The creature studied it, turning it over, then placed it precisely in the center of the barn floor. Henry could not explain how it knew the object or why it treated it with such reverence. A sense of awe and unease mingled in the shadows, leaving him to wonder about the boundaries of knowledge and memory. Why does the creature seem to recognize familiar objects it should have never seen? Could one small barn hold a secret so vast that even its caretaker barely grasps the truth? Let us tell you, a secret world built between them. Winter thinned into spring, and the edges of the forest began to hum with quiet life. Henry's morning started before the sun, moving through the soft mist to check on the creature. He had learned to anticipate its patterns, the cautious stretches, the pauses in shadow, the subtle sounds it made when curious or wary. He began marking paths through the undergrowth with small cairns, each signal invisible to any passerby but clear to the creature. These markers became a language neither fully understood yet both respected, a silent choreography that governed movement through their shared space. The barn's perimeter transformed under Henry's meticulous attention. He planted saplings in tight, staggered rows that, in time, would form natural walls, concealing the clearing from prying eyes. He adjusted the feeding routine, creating erratic rhythms that would mislead anyone who might stumble upon the area. He even devised hand signals to warn the creature of visitors long before they approached. The sophistication of these precautions impressed him. He had built shelters and hidden gardens before, but never for anything so profoundly alive and aware. As the seasons passed, the creature's behavior became startlingly complex. It started gathering materials, testing textures, and experimenting with tools that Henry had long dismissed as mundane. Bits of bark were woven into patterns, rocks stacked to form abstract maps, and shadows traced across the floor like living diagrams. Each action suggested memory and calculation, but also an unmistakable sense of play. Henry realized that isolation had not dulled it. Instead, it had created a space where intelligence could flourish without interruption. Henry began to recognize small routines that were not his own. The creature would position itself near the barn's doorway at precise times, tilting its head as if calculating light, wind, and distance. It would explore textures of soil, moss, and tree bark, sometimes rubbing its hands along surfaces as if cataloging information. Henry observed the patterns, noting the intervals and repetitions, attempting to find a logic that could explain the sophistication. It was as if a mind centuries old or unimaginably young existed entirely in the present moment, learning and adjusting continuously. The trust between them deepened without words. The creature would allow Henry to approach during moments of preparation, yet retreat when it sensed hesitation or danger. At times it would imitate gestures, picking up a tool and holding it in a way that mirrored Henry's movements. The subtle mimicry became a form of dialogue, each action a response that required observation and careful consideration. For Henry, it was exhilarating and disorienting. The barn had become a laboratory of consciousness and connection. Henry's ingenuity expanded to match the creature's adaptability. He built small compartments within the barn where items could be organized and rearranged without disturbing their integrity. He designed signals with ropes, bells, and mirrored reflections to communicate distant warnings. Every precaution, every minor adjustment created an ecosystem where life, thought, and survival intertwined. The isolation, which might have once felt oppressive, now seemed vital, allowing both human and creature to thrive on mutual awareness and respect. As the creature explored its environment, Henry noticed subtle innovations in its behavior that were impossible to ignore. It began combining natural and manufactured objects to create functional structures, a small ramp made from fallen planks, a tool fashioned from a stick, and a jagged rock, even a rudimentary storage space for objects of interest. Each creation revealed a mind capable of foresight, problem-solving, and deliberate action. Henry's admiration was tempered by unease. He realized the creature's potential could surpass anything he had imagined. Evenings became a ritual of observation. Shadows deepened in the barn as Henry and the creature moved around one another, performing tasks, communicating in gestures, and silently negotiating boundaries. There were moments when the creature seemed to anticipate Henry's needs before he expressed them, setting objects in place or signaling attention toward unseen hazards. The level of awareness was staggering, and Henry understood that this fragile world depended entirely on shared vigilance, trust, and restraint. One day, as Henry watched the creature arrange a line of stones leading to a hidden corner of the barn, he noticed something extraordinary. The pattern echoed the layout of the barn itself, reflecting corridors, corners, and entry points with uncanny precision. The creature had not only observed the space, but internalized it, creating a representation of their shared domain in miniature. Henry felt a surge of awe and apprehension, realizing the depth of cognition he had been witnessing all along. How long can a world survive when it depends entirely on two beings trusting each other? Could the secrets it hides be more dangerous than the world outside? Let us guide you into what no one expected. Unexpected intelligence and unasked questions. The morning sun fell in fragmented beams through the barn's gaps, illuminating a scene that made Henry's heart quicken. The creature had positioned small stones into intricate sequences, each line following precise angles and spacing. The patterns seemed almost deliberate in a mathematical sense, and Henry could not help but study them in disbelief. He had seen intelligence before, but this was deliberate problem-solving with aesthetic and functional nuance. There was intention here, and it went far beyond mere survival. Henry tried to mirror the arrangement, cautiously placing a stone in line with its design, but the creature watched closely, cocking its head at him. A subtle gesture, a tilt, a pause, a gentle tap on a stone, conveyed both correction and instruction. It was communication without language. A complex dialogue of gesture and observation. Henry realized that the creature was not merely responding, it was testing, evaluating, teaching, and learning simultaneously. He began to sense that the barn had become not just a refuge, but a classroom. Later that week, the creature attempted something even more astonishing. Using twigs, scraps of wood, and bits of rope, it recreated the interior of the barn on the floor, from the bench to the shadows in the corners. Each element was positioned with striking fidelity, reflecting both observation and memory. Henry watched in awe, unable to suppress the shiver of recognition that this was deliberate mimicry, a method of understanding their shared world on its own terms. This display forced him to reconsider the limits of its cognition. Henry began documenting every gesture, pattern, and sequence, filling pages with sketches and notes that barely captured the creature's sophistication. He noted how it combined natural objects with remnants of human tools, creating hybrid constructions that were functional, symbolic, or perhaps even ritualistic. There was a methodical intelligence at work, but also an element of intuition, a capacity to predict and adapt that far exceeded anything Henry had encountered. The barn was no longer a place of simple shelter. It had become a laboratory of consciousness, memory, and perception. Curiosity grew when Henry observed the creature manipulating objects in sequences that seemed almost like counting or coding. A pile of sticks arranged into clusters, a line of stones with subtle variations in size and shape, a circle of leaves surrounding a central mark. Each arrangement seemed to carry meaning, yet he could not decode it. The realization hit him. The creature was communicating, but on a level far subtler than words. It chose what to reveal and what to withhold. And the silence itself was a language. Evenings brought new lessons. The creature would approach, gesture, and sometimes pause in ways that suggested reflection. When Henry left the barn briefly, it would inspect his absence, noting each change in position, each displaced object. It displayed awareness of time and continuity, an understanding of cause and effect, and an uncanny ability to anticipate human behavior. Henry began to understand that every moment in the barn was a negotiation, an unspoken contract between two minds learning each other's rhythms. There were moments of disquiet as well. The creature's expressions sometimes hinted at contemplation of things beyond Henry's comprehension. It would pause at certain tools, certain textures, or even empty spaces, staring as if recalling events or knowledge it could not yet share. Henry felt a pang of frustration, realizing that intelligence was only part of the story. There was also choice, secrecy, and restraint. The barn held more questions than answers, and each discovery seemed to open dozens more. Henry experimented with indirect communication, leaving objects in different arrangements to see how the creature would respond. Some were ignored, others rearranged with precision. Occasionally, it would mimic a gesture Henry had unconsciously repeated days before, as if confirming understanding or subtly correcting him. This dance of perception and adaptation created a rhythm, a bond of mutual awareness that neither fully controlled. The creature's mind was revealed in fragments, each one reshaping Henry's assumptions about consciousness, trust, and the boundaries between species. By the time night fell, Henry sat exhausted on the barn floor, pages scattered around him, watching the creature inspect the final arrangement of stones for the day. Its gaze lingered on him with unflinching focus, and he felt a profound weight in the silence. The question that had been growing since their first meeting had deepened into something almost unbearable. If the creature could communicate, what was it choosing not to say? If the creature can communicate, what is it choosing not to say? What if the secrets it holds are even more perilous than the world beyond? Stay with us to know. Threats that shift the ground beneath them. Spring had barely settled when the forest began to feel different. Sounds that were once ordinary, a distant woodpecker, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, now carried a sense of menace. Henry noticed footprints in soft earth that did not belong to him or the creature, large, rounded impressions, deep and deliberate, trailing toward the barn. He bent low to examine them, noting subtle differences in depth and pattern, clues to size and weight. The intrusion unsettled him. Their hidden world was no longer theirs alone. As days passed, whispers reached Henry through indirect channels. Hunters in nearby woods spoke in hushed tones of enormous tracks and glimpses of something unusual among the trees. A camper mentioned midnight echoes, strange, low sounds that seemed almost too rhythmic to be random. Even a land surveyor, under the guise of routine inspection, began asking questions that hinted at suspicions far beyond ordinary curiosity. Each report forced Henry to reconsider the safety of their carefully orchestrated routines. The creature reacted instantly to the heightened attention. Its movements became sharper, more deliberate, as though it sensed an invisible pressure bearing down. Objects in the barn were repositioned into barricades. Straw shifted into protective layers, and even the shadows along the walls seemed to be accounted for. Henry watched in amazement as it inspected the perimeter, sniffing the air, listening to distant sounds, as if cataloging every potential threat. The creature's instinct for survival was now joined by strategy, and Henry had no choice but to follow suit. Henry upgraded their defenses with a precision born of necessity. He reinforced doors, camouflaged entry points with branches and underbrush, and constructed false trails to mislead anyone venturing too close. Yet every measure he took revealed a new layer of vulnerability. The creature would observe these modifications with intense scrutiny, sometimes altering them subtly, sometimes ignoring them entirely, leaving Henry uncertain whether it approved or was testing him. Their shared vigilance had evolved into a silent, high-stakes negotiation where any mistake could have consequences neither fully understood. The forest itself seemed to conspire with the tension. Animals became less visible, their usual calls muted, while unexplained disturbances appeared near the barn. Rocks shifted, broken branches piled unnaturally, and faint footprints intersected with the creature's own path. Henry realized that the presence of others had not only made them cautious, but had altered the rhythm of the entire ecosystem around them. Every day became a careful calculation, every step measured to avoid detection, every sound a possible warning or threat. Even the creature's intelligence took on a new dimension under pressure. It began creating signals that Henry could barely notice at first, small marks on trees, subtle alignments of objects, and patterns in the straw that seemed to convey warnings. At night, it would patrol silently, sometimes disappearing entirely into the forest, only to return with an object or adjustment that communicated unseen observations. Henry marveled at the sophistication of these behaviors, realizing they were witnessing more than survival. They were witnessing planning, prediction, and possibly even strategy. Henry's own nerves frayed as the intrusions escalated. He could not ignore the sense of eyes watching, of footsteps echoing in the distance, of unknown voices murmuring under the cover of darkness. The barn that had once felt like sanctuary now seemed exposed, a fragile stronghold teetering between safety and discovery. Each unexpected sound sparked a rush of adrenaline, and the creature's tension mirrored his own. They were no longer two beings sharing a hidden space. They were co-defenders against a world that had begun to breach the boundaries of their secrecy. For the first time, Henry considered the possibility that the creature might act independently, that it might no longer want to remain hidden. Its gaze at the forest carried intention, an unspoken message that it understood more than he could predict. There was an edge to its movements, a readiness that Henry could not ignore. The delicate ecosystem they had built, the routines, the signals, the shared trust, now depended on the creature's willingness to stay, on a decision that was entirely its own. At night, Henry lay awake listening to the forest. The wind carried distant echoes, hints of intruders, and the occasional metallic glint of unknown tools. The barn itself felt alive, almost tense with anticipation. He realized that their secret was no longer confined to the shadows. The world outside had begun to press in, reshaping the rules, redefining the boundaries, and challenging every assumption he had made about trust, intelligence, and survival. What happens when the creature decides it no longer wants to stay hidden? What if a single choice threatened to unravel everything they've quietly built? Join us as the secrets grow even darker. A dangerous ally joins the secret. The weeks of heightened tension left Henry exhausted. The forest no longer felt like a refuge but a pressure cooker, every rustle or distant step a potential disaster. His body, already worn from years of work, betrayed him with sharp pains and dizzy spells that left him uncertain of his own strength. For the first time, he understood that the secret they had nurtured for years could not survive on his endurance alone. Reluctantly, he made a decision that would shift everything. He would bring in someone else. The newcomer arrived cautiously, a figure Henry had trusted for decades, though never in a matter like this. Eyes wide with disbelief, they were ushered into the barn, where shadows stretched unnaturally long against walls, lined with carefully arranged tools and patterns. The creature observed silently from the far corner, head tilted, posture alert. Henry watched the subtle interactions, how the creature assessed, judged, and tested this new presence, realizing instantly that trust was not given lightly here. Together, the three became a precarious triangle of awareness. The newcomer noticed details Henry had overlooked, slight shifts in the creature's stance, the precise alignment of objects that conveyed warning, the faint signs of intelligence layered into its movements. They proposed adjustments, hidden paths, subtle warning systems, and signals designed to mislead any unwelcome eyes, but each suggestion also carried risk. A misstep, an unintended gesture, could fracture the fragile balance Henry and the creature had maintained for so long. The creature's reactions were measured yet unpredictable. It accepted some interventions, ignored others, and occasionally acted in ways that seemed designed to test both humans. Henry realized that adding a guardian to their secret was not a simple safeguard. It introduced a dynamic force that could either strengthen or destroy their hidden world. Their shared isolation now became a web of delicate choices, where every glance, every signal, and every adjustment carried the weight of survival. Will the secret grow safer with another guardian, or more vulnerable? Stay here to know. Government eyes in the trees. By autumn, the forest was no longer just a sanctuary. It had become a battlefield of surveillance. Drones hovered above the treetops, their faint buzzing impossible to ignore. Hikers reported strange heat signatures and metallic glints through the trees, forming an unnerving pattern. Henry felt the walls of secrecy closing in from every side. The creature reacted instinctively. Shadows lengthened as it patrolled the perimeter, ears attuned to the faintest disturbance. Objects in the barn were arranged with strategic intent, pathways subtly altered, and the environment itself became a system of signals and barriers. Yet human intrusions grew smarter, coordinated, and persistent. Henry noticed patterns in the federal presence that unsettled him further. Surveyors arrived under official pretenses, noting unusual plant growth, terrain changes, or small forest modifications. Cameras, drones, and heat signals suggested agencies were tracing anomalies, seeking something beyond ordinary perception. The barn, once hidden under decay, now felt like a fragile island in a sea of scrutiny. Tension between the humans and the creature escalated. The newcomer's presence, initially strengthening defenses, now complicated interactions. The creature alternated between cautious observation and assertive protection, often acting before Henry could intervene. The forest's rhythms had shifted. Every rustle, shadow, and signal carried danger. Henry realized that no matter how clever their routines or precise their signals, the secret was on borrowed time. Every hidden corner of the barn, every trail and pattern was at risk. The fragile world they had constructed, the routines, the trust, the balance between human and creature, now teetered on the edge of exposure. The forest, once a refuge, had become a crucible where secrecy, intelligence, and survival collided. Were you stunned by the decades-long secret this farmer kept and the intelligence of the creature he protected? Tell us which part of this unbelievable story left you speechless.